The taste of blood filled my mouth as I bit my lip, staring at the mahogany desk that had belonged to my father. My fingers traced the smooth wood, remembering the day he signed over 45% of MediCore Pharmaceuticals to me. "Only trust yourself with what you've built, Sofia," he'd said. Now, 6 months after his death, those words echoed in my head as I prepared for our annual Christmas dinner, not knowing my own husband had gathered our entire family to strip me of my inheritance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sofia Chen, and this is how I learned that the man I married was willing to destroy our family to gain control of a $2.8 billion company. The December air was crisp as I moved through our penthouse, adjusting the crystal glasses on our dining table. Each place setting had to be perfect. It was my first time hosting the family Christmas dinner since Dad's passing. The city lights of Singapore twinkled through our floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow across the expensive holiday, decorations my husband Marcus had insisted on. "Everything looks fantastic, Mrs. Wei," our housekeeper Marina whispered, helping me adjust a centerpiece. "Mr. Wei will be pleased." I smiled, though something in my stomach tightened. Marcus had been acting strange lately. Late nights at the office, hushed phone calls, mysterious meetings with the board members. I'd brushed it off as end-of-year stress. MediCore was launching a groundbreaking cancer treatment in January, and as CFO, Marcus was under immense pressure. "Sofia!" a voice called from the entrance. My sister-in-law Victoria swept in, designer heels clicking against the marble floor. Behind her, her husband James, MediCore's head of legal, offered a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The place looks absolutely divine." I hugged them both, noticing how Victoria's embrace was a touch too rigid, James's handshake a fraction too brief. Before I could dwell on it, more guests arrived. Marcus's parents, Richard and Diana Wei, their faces masks of polite interest. My younger brother Michael, a research scientist at MediCore, his usual energetic greetings somewhat subdued. And finally, our majority shareholder, Uncle Philip, who'd been my father's best friend and business partner for 30 years. Marcus emerged from his home office, impeccable in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Darling," he said, kissing my cheek. His cologne, usually comforting, seemed to choke me. "Let's get everyone seated, shall we?" As we moved to the dining room, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. The red cheongsam I wore, a modern take on traditional Chinese dress, had been my mother's favorite before cancer took her 3 years ago. The delicate gold phoenix pattern seemed to shimmer in the candlelight, a symbol of rebirth and resilience. I'd chosen it carefully for tonight, hoping to honor both my parents' memory at this first Christmas without them. I didn't know then that in less than an hour, that same dress would witness the destruction of everything I'd believed about my marriage. Marina and the other staff began serving the first course, a fusion of traditional Chinese and Western holiday dishes that I'd spent weeks planning. The conversation flowed, but there was an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. Glances exchanged, phones checked under the table. My brother Michael barely touched his food, his scientist's mind seemingly elsewhere. Before we continue with dinner, Marcus suddenly announced, standing with his wine glass, "I have something important to discuss." His voice carried that smooth confidence that had first attracted me to him 8 years ago. Now it sent a chill down my spine. I looked around the table. No one seemed surprised by the interruption. That's when I knew, whatever was coming. They'd all been aware of it before they walked through my door. Marcus's hand rested on my shoulder, his fingers pressing slightly too hard as he remained standing. My skin crawled beneath the silk of my cheongsam, but I maintained my composure, years of corporate training kicking in. "As you all know," he continued, his voice carrying that practiced boardroom resonance, "MediCore's cancer treatment trials have reached a critical phase. The results are—" He paused, eyes scanning the table. Unprecedented. I felt my brother, Michael, shift in his seat. As lead researcher, he'd been practically living in the lab for months. But something in his expression now, a tightness around his eyes, made my chest constrict. Uncle Philip cleared his throat, setting down his chopsticks with deliberate precision. Perhaps we should move this discussion to the study. His eyes, usually warm with decades of friendship, wouldn't meet mine. No. Marcus's voice cut through the tension. This concerns everyone, and we'll discuss it here. He squeezed my shoulder, again this time gentler, almost apologetic. The treatment success rate in trials is 94%. It's not just a breakthrough, it's a revolution in oncology. The news should have been cause for celebration. My father had devoted his life to finding better cancer treatments after my mother's diagnosis. This was his legacy realized. Yet the atmosphere around the table remained heavy, expectant. Diana Way, my mother-in-law, dabbed her lips with a napkin, her jade bracelet catching the light. "Marcus, darling, perhaps we should have dessert first. I believe Sofia mentioned a special black sesame yuzu cake." "Mother," Marcus cut her off, uncharacteristically sharp. "The FDA fast-track approval is practically guaranteed. Our stock value is projected to triple within 6 months." He finally released my shoulder, moving to stand at the head of the table. But there's a problem. I watched as James, our legal counsel, subtly slid a folder from his briefcase. My sister-in-law, Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her wine glass, creating a soft, rhythmic ping that seemed to count down to something inevitable. "The board is concerned about the current leadership structure," Marcus continued. "With Philip's shares combined with Sofia's inheritance, the way family's voting power is limited. It's creating investor uncertainty." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. I felt the weight of multiple gazes, some pitying, others calculating. My hand tightened around my chopsticks, the sterling silver warm against my palm. The merger proposal with Way International could solve this, Marcus said, nodding to James, who began distributing documents. "But it requires a consolidated voting block." The folder landed in front of me with a soft thud. Through the haze of confusion and growing dread, one detail caught my eye. The corner of the document bore today's date. Christmas Eve. They'd planned this, timed it perfectly, a corporate ambush disguised as a family dinner. "It's quite straightforward, really," James added, his legal tone jarringly formal in our dining room. "The merger would ensure stable leadership through the product launch. The market responds well to clear hierarchies." I didn't open the folder. Instead, I watched a drop of condensation roll down my water glass, leaving a trail like a tear. Through the window behind Marcus, the Singapore skyline glittered indifferently, buildings sharp as teeth against the night sky. "The board meeting is scheduled for December 26th, Marcus said softly. "All we need is your signature, darling. Transfer your shares to me and everything moves forward smoothly. The treatment reaches the market faster. Lives are saved sooner." His smile didn't waver. "It's what your father would have wanted." The mention of my father made something crack inside me. I could picture him at this very table, teaching me to read financial reports when I was 12, explaining market strategies over dim sum on Sundays. The weight of his legacy pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Marina appeared, silently at my elbow, refilling water glasses with practiced efficiency. As she reached across to fill Marcus's glass, her hand brushed against mine. A brief, subtle gesture of support that nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. The air conditioning hummed softly overhead, circulating the mingled scents of food growing cold and expensive perfume. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring, heralding midnight's approach. Christmas Eve was slipping away, taking with it the last remnants of the life I'd thought I knew. I lifted my wine, glass, buying time, watching the light play through the burgundy liquid. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Every eye at the table was fixed on me, waiting for my response. But beneath their gazes, beneath the pressure and expectation, something else was building. A slow-burning fury that tasted like metal and determination. My father's words echoed again. Only trust yourself with what you've built. The burgundy wine in my glass had started to taste like vinegar. I set it down, the crystal making a soft clink against the imported tablecloth. The timing seems rather calculated, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Presenting this on Tauziar's Christmas Eve. Business doesn't stop for holidays, Sofia, Victoria chimed in, examining her reflection in a dessert spoon. The pharmaceutical industry certainly doesn't. I turned to Uncle Philip, searching for any trace of the man who'd bounced me on his knee during board meetings 30 years ago. You knew about this? He shifted uncomfortably, his silver cufflinks catching the light. The merger makes sense. Sofia, Way International's distribution network in Southeast Asia would effectively give them control of our patents, I cut in. The pieces were starting to align, forming a picture that turned my stomach. Including the cancer treatment. Michael suddenly stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. He headed toward the balcony, lab papers spilling from his jacket pocket. One floated to the ground, preliminary trial results, I realized, with sections heavily redacted. Marcus moved to retrieve the paper, but I was faster. The data tables were familiar. I'd reviewed hundreds like them over the years. But something about these numbers didn't align with what he'd just presented. 94% success rate? I asked, scanning the document. That's not what these results show. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. James reached for the paper, but I pulled it back, continuing to read. These trials show severe complications in over 40% of cases. The success rate is barely 60%. Those are outdated results, Marcus said smoothly, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. The latest trials were completed last week, Michael interrupted from the balcony doorway, his voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before. And they're worse. Diana Way's jade bracelet clattered against her plate. Perhaps this isn't the appropriate time. When would be appropriate, Mother? I asked, my voice taking on an edge. After the merger? After Way International buries? These results and rushes an unsafe treatment to market? Victoria's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. You're being dramatic, Sofia. The board has reviewed everything thoroughly. Has it? I stood up, walking to the sideboard where my laptop sat. Because as a board member, I haven't seen any recent trial data. I opened my email, quickly scanning recent communications. In fact, I've been systematically excluded from key meetings for the past 3 months. Marcus approached me, his expensive shoes silent on the marble floor. Darling, you've been grieving. We didn't want to burden you with the truth? I typed in my password, pulling up the company's secure server. That you've been manipulating trial data? That Way International plans to cut corners on safety, protocols to beat competitors to market? James cleared his throat. These are serious allegations, Sofia. Without evidence. Oh, I have evidence. I turned my laptop around, displaying a series of emails I'd archived months ago when something in my gut first told me things weren't right, including communications between Way International and certain board members dating back 6 months. The color drained from Marcus's face. Behind him, I saw Uncle Philip close his eyes, years of friendship and betrayal written in the lines of his face. You've been monitoring company emails? Victoria's voice rose an octave. That's illegal. Actually, I replied, as head of compliance and major shareholder, it's my job. A job I've apparently been doing better than anyone realized. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the Singapore skyline continued its electric dance, oblivious to the drama unfolding in our penthouse. Marina appeared at the doorway, carrying the dessert I'd spent hours perfecting, then quietly retreated when she sensed the tension. "The merger isn't optional, Sofia," Marcus finally said, his confident facade cracking slightly. "The board votes in 2 days, with Philip's support, and the other shareholders we've secured. Your shares are the only thing standing in the way of progress." I looked around the table at these people I'd called family. Diana, adjusting her jade bracelet with trembling fingers. Victoria, her perfect makeup masking any real emotion. James, already calculating legal defenses. And Marcus, my husband, of 8 years, watching me with eyes I no longer recognized. Progress? I picked up the merger documents, feeling their weight. Is that what we're calling fraud these days? Michael stepped fully back into the room, taking up position beside me. "The treatment isn't ready," he said quietly. "In its current form, it could kill people. Just like it killed our mother. Hung, unspoken in the air." "Kill people?" Diana's voice quivered. "Marcus, you assured us the treatment was safe." My husband's mask of composure cracked further. "The potential benefits outweigh—" "Benefits?" I cut in, my voice sharp enough to make Victoria flinch. "Let me guess. Weigh International's stock options, the offshore accounts, or perhaps the kickbacks from rushing an untested drug to market?" The room went still. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. "How long?" I asked, turning to face Marcus fully. "How long have you been planning to seize control of MediCore?" Instead of Marcus, it was James who answered, his legal training taking over. "The merger negotiations began shortly after your father's death. Way International expressed concerns about emotional leadership during a critical phase." "Emotional leadership?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter. "You mean my grief for my father? Or my insistence on maintaining his ethical standards?" Uncle Philip stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Your father built this company on integrity, Sofia, but times change. The market demands—" "The market?" Michael's laugh was harsh. "Uncle Phil, they've been falsifying trial data. People could die." A glass shattered. We all turned to see Marina frozen in the doorway, pieces of crystal scattered at her feet. But it wasn't the broken glass that held everyone's attention. It was the phone in her hand, its recording light blinking red. Marcus moved with unexpected speed, reaching for the phone, but Marina was quicker. She backed away, her years of quiet service transformed into steel resolve. "Mrs. Way has been good to me," she said, her voice steady. "I record everything in this house. For security, Mr. Way. Like you asked." The implications hit the room like a thunderclap. Everything. She had recorded everything. "You bug your own home?" Victoria's disgust was palpable. Marcus's face contorted. "Sofia, call off your maid. Now." "My maid?" I felt a laugh bubble up, slightly hysterical. "Marina was your hire, Marcus. Your eyes and ears, wasn't she? To monitor me after father died?" I turned to Marina. "But somewhere along the way, you saw what was really happening." Marina nodded, clutching the phone tighter. 3 months ago, the first merger meeting, in this room. The pieces clicked into place. The strange gaps in my security access. The missing files. The misplaced trial data. While they'd been watching me, Marina had been watching them. "This is absurd," Marcus snarled. "A servant's recording won't—" "Hold up in court?" I finished for him. "Maybe not alone, but combined with the evidence I've been gathering. The external audits I quietly commissioned, the independent lab reviews of the trial data." The color drained from James's face. "External audits?" I walked to the painting behind my chair, a contemporary piece Marcus had always hated. Swinging. It aside revealed a wall safe. "Did you really think I spent the last 6 months just grieving? That I didn't notice the late-night meetings? The changed security protocols?" "Sofia!" Uncle Philip stepped forward, his voice pleading. Be reasonable. Think about the company's future. I am thinking about the future. I entered the combination. I'm thinking about the cancer patients who trust us with their lives. I'm thinking about the researchers who deserve to have their work respected. The safe clicked open. I'm thinking about my father's legacy. From the safe, I withdrew a thick folder. Complete copies of the original trial data. Correspondence between Way International and their shell companies. Offshore account details. I met Marcus's eyes. And proof of insider trading dating back to before my father's death. The room erupted into chaos. Victoria lunged for the folder. James started spouting legal threats. Diana burst into tears. But above it all, Marcus's voice cut through, cold and final. If you do this, you'll destroy everything, including yourself. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. The ambitious CFO I'd fallen in love with had become something else entirely. Or maybe he'd always been this way, and I'd been too blinded by love to see it. No, Marcus, I said quietly. You destroyed everything the moment you decided profit was worth more than people's lives. I nodded to Marina, who was already sending the recordings to a secure server. Michael pulled out his phone, dialing a number we both knew by heart. The head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, an old family friend who'd been my father's roommate in college. Outside, church bells began to ring, signaling midnight. Christmas Day. In the distance, I could hear carolers, their voices carrying faintly through the glass. Silent night, holy night. But in our penthouse dining room, nothing was silent and nothing was holy. The next hour unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of chaos. Securities and Exchange Commission officers swarmed our penthouse, their badges glinting under the crystal chandelier. The Christmas tree lights cast shifting shadows on their faces as they collected laptops, phones, and documents. I sat in my father's study, watching through the glass walls as my family's empire teetered on the edge of exposure. Marcus was in the living room, his lawyer already present, their hushed conversations carrying an edge of desperation. Victoria and James had fled the moment the SEC arrived, their heels clicking a rapid retreat down the marble hallway. Ms. Chen? A woman in a sharp suit appeared at my door. I'm Agent Sarah Reynolds. We need to discuss protection protocols. I raised an eyebrow. Protection? She settled into the leather chair across from me, her expression grave. Way International has significant connections throughout Asia. Given the evidence you've provided and the potential financial impact of these revelations, we need to ensure your safety. A harsh laugh escaped my throat. You think they'd try to silence you? It wouldn't be the first time a whistleblower faced retaliation. She slid a card across my father's mahogany desk. This is the direct line to our protection unit. Through the glass, I watched as Michael worked with another agent, his laptop open to rows of trial data. His hands moved animatedly as he explained the discrepancies, the passion for truth that our parents had instilled in both of us shining through. Mrs. Way, Marina appeared at the door, her usual calm demeanor slightly shaken. Your mother-in-law is asking to speak with you. She's quite insistent. Before I could respond, Diana burst past Marina, her jade bracelet jangling frantically. Sophia, you must stop this madness. Think about what you're doing to our family. Family? The word tasted like ashes. Was it family when you helped Marcus? Plan this takeover? When you sat in my home, ate my food, all while knowing what he intended, Diana's perfectly maintained facade cracked. Everything we did was for the greater good. The merger would have secured all our futures. At the cost of how many lives? I stood, my father's chair rolling back against the window. Below, more SEC vehicles were arriving, their lights painting the night in flashes of blue and red. The treatment isn't ready, Diana. The side effects can be managed. With proper documentation and controlled trials. Controlled trials? Michael appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with anger. Like the ones where you buried the deaths? 3 patients, Diana. 3 people died in the last trial alone. The color drained from Diana's face. That's not... Marcus said. Marcus lied, I said softly. To all of us. Agent Reynolds cleared her throat. Mrs. Wei, we need your statement now. And Ms. Chen, our team will escort you to a secure location. Secure location? Diana's voice rose. Sophia, you can't leave. The press will be here any minute. We need to present a united front. I looked around my father's study, at the family photos on the walls, the awards and certificates marking decades of ethical pharmaceutical research, the small jade Buddha, that had been his good luck charm. Everything that his legacy stood for was in these 4 walls. There is no we anymore, Diana, I said, gathering my laptop and the Buddha. Your son made sure of that. A commotion from the living room drew our attention. Marcus was being led. Out in handcuffs, his typical composure shattered. Our eyes met through the glass. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd married. Vulnerable, almost pleading. Then his face hardened, and he mouthed 2 words that sent a chill down my spine. Watch out. Agent Reynolds must have seen it too. We need to move. Now. Marina appeared with a small overnight bag. I packed your essentials, Mrs. Wei, and... She hesitated, then pressed a USB drive into my hand. More recordings, from the office. Mr. Wei didn't know about the secondary system. A wave of gratitude washed over me. Marina, she shook her head. Your father gave my daughter a chance at university. A good job at MediCore. This was the least I could do. As agents began to escort me out, Diana grabbed my arm. Sophia, please. Everything we built... You built this, Diana, I said, gently removing her hand. You and Marcus and everyone else who chose profit over people. Now you get to watch it. Burn. The elevator ride down was silent, heavy with the weight of everything that had just imploded. In my pocket, my phone buzzed continuously. News alerts already starting to pop up about unusual activity at MediCore's headquarters. Outside, the Singapore night was alive with sirens and flashing lights. As agents hurried me toward an unmarked car, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the lobby's glass doors. The woman staring back at me looked different. Harder, stronger. Someone my father would have been proud of. The safe house turned out to be a sleek apartment in the colonial district of Singapore, far from the gleaming towers of the financial center. Agent Reynolds led me through a private entrance, past state-of-the-art security systems that would have impressed even Marcus's paranoid standards. Dr. Lim is waiting upstairs, she said, scanning her fingerprint at another checkpoint. She insisted on being here. My heart jumped. Dr. Sarah Lim, my father's oldest friend and head of our research ethics committee. The last time I'd seen her was at his funeral, her fierce intellect temporarily softened by grief. The apartment door opened to reveal Sarah's familiar figure, her silver hair pulled back in its usual severe bun. Before I could say a word, she wrapped me in a tight hug that smelled of jasmine tea and laboratory antiseptic. You brilliant, reckless girl, she whispered, then pulled back to examine my face. Your father would be so proud. A team of agents swept through the apartment, checking for surveillance devices. In the modern kitchen, another familiar face appeared. Lisa Wong, my father's personal attorney for 20 years. Her trademark red glasses perched on her nose as she spread documents across the granite counter. The SEC's moving fast, Lisa said, gesturing me over. Wei International's stock is already suspended in pre-market trading. Their CEO is being questioned in Hong Kong. Sarah pressed a cup of tea into my hands. Tell us everything, from the beginning. As I recounted the evening's events, Lisa's pen flew across her legal pad while Sarah's face grew increasingly thunderous. When I mentioned the falsified trial data, she slammed her hand on the counter. Those bastards! 3 years of research corrupted for profit. She pulled out her tablet, fingers flying over the screen. I've got researchers in 5 countries who need to be notified. Their work could be compromised. That's not all, I said, reaching for Marina's USB drive. There's something else. Something that's been bothering me since I saw those trial results. Lisa connected the drive to her secure laptop. Documents, emails, and audio files populated. The screen. But I was looking for something specific. A series of meetings that had taken place in the weeks before my father's death. There, I pointed. 3 private meetings between Marcus and Way International's board. No minutes recorded. Sarah leaned in, her eyes narrowing. The timing. That was right before your father's final inspection of the research facilities. The inspection he never completed, Lisa added quietly. Because of his accident, the word hung in the air like poison. My father's death had been ruled an accident, a tragic car crash on a rainy night. But I remembered how adamant he'd been about that final inspection, how certain he was that something wasn't right with the preliminary trial data. Agent Reynolds, who'd been quietly monitoring the security feeds, turned sharply. Are you suggesting— I'm not suggesting anything, I said carefully. I'm just noting that my father, who had never had so much as a parking ticket, somehow lost control of his car the night before he was scheduled to review sensitive trial. Data? Lisa's fingers flew over her keyboard. I'm accessing the original accident report, your father's personal files, everything. I need to make some calls, Sarah said, her voice tight. There are people at the research facilities, people who might have noticed things at the time but were afraid to speak up. A notification pinged on the secure phone Agent Reynolds had given me. Breaking news. Way International's offices in Myanmar, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Singapore were being raided simultaneously. The company's stock had plunged 40% in overseas markets. They're calling it the biggest pharmaceutical scandal in Asian history, Reynolds said, scanning her tablet. Your brother's already giving testimony about the trial data. The SEC's bringing in forensic accountants for the financial records. My phone buzzed again, a message from an encrypted number. My blood ran cold as I read it. You're just like your father, too stubborn to let things go. He paid for that mistake. Don't make the same one. Sarah caught my expression. Sofia, what is it? I handed her the phone. Her face darkened as she read the message, then exchanged glances with Agent Reynolds. We need to move her, Reynolds said immediately. This location could be compromised. No, I said firmly, surprising myself. I'm done running, done hiding. I turned to Lisa. How quickly can you get me full access to the company's secure servers? Every file, every email, every transaction? Lisa's red glasses glinted. Give me an hour. But Sofia, are you sure? This could get dangerous. I thought of my father, of his unwavering commitment to doing what was right, of the patients whose lives hung in the balance, of Marcus's whispered threat. Watch out. They want to play dangerous? I said, my voice steady. Let's show them what dangerous really looks like. The next 12 hours transformed the colonial apartment into a war room. Lisa's legal team had set up a digital command center in the living room, multiple screens displaying real-time data feeds from MediCore's servers. Sarah coordinated with research teams across Asia, piecing together the full extent of the trial data manipulation. Look at this, Sarah called out, her tablet, displaying a complex molecular diagram. They didn't just falsify results. They modified the drug's formula. Cheaper synthesis, faster production, but exponentially more dangerous. I leaned over her shoulder, my years of biochemistry training kicking in. They changed the binding mechanism that would increase the risk of organ failure by 300%, she finished grimly. And they buried it in supplementary data no one would think to check. Agent Reynolds entered with a fresh team of cybersecurity experts. We've traced the threatening message, It bounced through servers in 5 countries, but it originated from Way International's Singapore office, I finished, pulling up an email chain on my laptop. Specifically from their chief of operations, Alan Zhao, who, interestingly, was also present at all 3 meetings with my father before his death. Lisa looked up from her stack of legal documents. Alan Zhao? Wasn't he in charge of facility security during your father's last inspection? Including the security cameras that mysteriously malfunctioned the night of his accident, I confirmed. But he made a mistake. Look at this. I projected an email onto the main screen. It was dated 3 days before my father's death, a seemingly innocent exchange about facility maintenance. But embedded in the metadata was something crucial. A authorization code, one of the cybersecurity experts breathed. For the automated security systems on the access road where your father's accident occurred. The room went silent. Sarah's hands trembled as she set down her tablet. Sophia, if they find out you've discovered this, they already suspect I know something, I said, pulling up another document. Which is why we're going to use their paranoia against them. Lisa, remember that contingency plan my father created? The one he called Protocol Phoenix? Lisa's eyes widened behind her red frames. The complete corporate restructuring blueprint? But that was designed as a last resort in case of exactly this kind of situation, I finished. He knew, Lisa. He knew something like this might happen. I moved to the whiteboard that dominated one wall, uncapping a marker. Here's what we're going to do. First, we trigger Protocol Phoenix. It automatically initiates a complete audit of all research data across every MediCore facility. That'll take weeks, Sarah protested. Exactly, I smiled grimly. Weeks during which Way International can't move forward with their plans without raising even more red flags. Meanwhile, we activate the secondary protocol. I drew a complex organizational chart, highlighting key positions. Every research head, every project leader, every key scientist gets immediate whistleblower protection. We flood the zone with so much evidence that they can't silence everyone. Agent Reynolds stepped forward, studying the chart. And while they're scrambling to contain that, we follow the money, I confirmed. Marina's recordings gave us the thread. Now we pull it until their whole web unravels. Lisa, how quickly can you file for emergency injunctions in every jurisdiction where MediCore operates? Give me 6 hours and enough coffee, she replied, already reaching for her phone. I turned to Sarah. I need you to contact every independent research facility that's ever worked with us. Have them review their data, looking specifically for patterns of manipulation. Create a tsunami of scientific scrutiny they can't possibly suppress. The cybersecurity team was already setting up additional encrypted channels. Agent Reynolds dispatched teams to secure key witnesses. The room hummed with purposeful energy, a stark contrast to the elegant Christmas dinner that had started this cascade just hours ago. My phone buzzed again. Another encrypted message. Last chance. Walk away now. Instead of fear, I felt a cold clarity descend. I typed back a single response. You should have learned from my father. Chens don't walk away. I turned back to the room, to these brilliant people who'd chosen truth over profit, justice over expedience. They think they can bury this in bureaucracy, drown us in legal challenges, or scare us into silence. They forget one thing. My father built MediCore to save lives, not stock prices, and I'm my father's daughter. Sarah squeezed my hand. What do you need us to do? I projected my father's last known photo onto the main screen. Him standing proudly in front of the research facility, the same facility where, weeks later, he would notice something wrong with the trial data. The same facility where Alan, Zhao had authorized security changes just days before the accident. We're going to do what my father would have done, I said, my voice firm. We're going to save lives, and then we're going to make them pay for every single one they put at risk. Dawn broke over Singapore as our plan snapped into action. The MediCore board had convened an emergency meeting at headquarters, exactly as we'd anticipated. I straightened my charcoal suit, a far cry from last night's festive cheongsam, and stepped into the elevator that would take me to the executive floor. "Cameras are looped," Agent Reynolds' voice confirmed through my earpiece. "Dr. Lim's team is in position at the research facility. Lisa's got judges standing by in 3 jurisdictions." The elevator doors opened to chaos. Phones rang incessantly. Executives hurried through corridors, their faces ashen. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, I could see Marcus and the remaining board members huddled around the conference table, their body language tense. "Sophia." Uncle Philip spotted me first, half rising from his chair. "This is a closed meeting. Security's a bit busy," I cut in, striding to the head of the table. "Something about SEC agents executing search warrants in the research wing." Marcus's knuckles whitened around his tablet. "Whatever. You think you're doing— Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing." I connected my laptop to the room's display system. "The question is, do you know what you've done?" The screen filled with data, trial results, email chains, financial transfers. But it was the security footage that caught everyone's attention. Crystal clear video of the access road the night of my father's accident. "That footage was corrupted," Alan Zhao blurted, then immediately realized his mistake. "Corrupted?" I zoomed in on a familiar car entering the facility. "Or deliberately erased? Like the real trial data? Like the autopsy results?" The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Board members exchanged nervous glances. "You're making dangerous accusations," Marcus said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "No. What's dangerous is rushing an untested drug to market." I pulled up the molecular diagrams Sarah had discovered. "Or should we discuss the modified formula? The one that increases production speed at the cost of patient safety?" "That's proprietary information," Alan stammered. "Actually," a new voice spoke from the doorway. "It's evidence." Dr. Sarah Lim entered, flanked by 2 SEC agents. Behind her came a stream of researchers, each carrying tablets loaded with data. "Dr. Zhao," Sarah's voice could have frozen hell. "Perhaps you'd like to explain why the security protocols changed the night before Charles Chen's inspection? The same protocols you personally authorized?" Alan's face went from red to white. He lurched for the door, but agents were already moving to block his exit. "This is absurd." Marcus stood, straightening his tie. "You can't just barge in here with wild theories, and they're not theories." Michael's voice cut through the room as he entered with another team of researchers. "Show them, Sophia." I pulled up the final piece of evidence. Financial records Marina had secretly recorded Marcus discussing with Way International executives. Records showing payments to offshore accounts, including one registered to Alan Zhao, dated the day after my father's death. "It's over, Marcus," I said quietly. "The FDA's suspending all trials, Interpol's freezing Way International's assets, and those offshore accounts, they're being traced as we speak." The boardroom erupted. Several members immediately began calling their lawyers. Others simply sat, stunned into silence. Uncle Philip aged decades before my eyes. "Charles was right about you," he whispered. "You see everything, just like he did." "Mr. Zhao," Agent Reynolds stepped forward, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and suspected involvement in the death of Charles Chen." As agents led Alan away, Marcus made one last desperate play. "The company will collapse, thousands of jobs lost. Is that what you want?" I walked to the window, looking out at the city where my father had built his dream of helping people. "MediCore won't collapse. Protocol Phoenix is already in effect." "Protocol what?" Victoria's voice cracked. "A complete corporate restructuring," Lisa announced, entering with a team of lawyers. "Designed by Charles Chen himself in the event of catastrophic ethical breaches. The board is dissolved, effective immediately. All research returns to independent oversight." I turned back to the room, to these people who had betrayed everything my father stood for. You tried to bury the truth. You tried to bury me. But my father taught me something important. The truth, like hope, has a way of rising from the ashes. Marcus was led away in handcuffs, his perfect facade finally shattered. As agents secured the room and lawyers began the massive task of documentation, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Your father would be proud, Sarah said softly. But this is just the beginning. The real work starts now. The next 48 hours transformed MediCore. I stood in my father's old office, now my office, watching teams of forensic accountants and research auditors flow through the building. The Singapore skyline glittered beyond the windows, indifferent to the corporate earthquake shaking. Its foundations. Latest update from Tokyo. Michael entered, tablet in hand. Way International's board is facing criminal charges. Their CEO just resigned. And the research facilities? Sarah's implementing the new protocols. Every trial, every test, every piece of data is being independently verified. He managed a small smile. 3 research teams have already volunteered to help rebuild the cancer treatment program the right way. Lisa burst in, her red glasses slightly askew. You need to see this. Marcus is talking. The wall screen flickered to life, showing an interrogation room. Marcus sat there, his designer suit wrinkled, his usual polish gone. Beside him, his new lawyer looked grim. Way International approached me 6 months before Charles Chen's death. Marcus's voice was hollow. They had concerns about the company's direction, about Charles's inflexibility, regarding trial protocols. And Alan Zhao? The investigator pressed. Marcus's laugh was bitter. Alan handled their special projects. When Charles started asking questions about the trial data, Alan made the problem go away. I felt my hands curl into fists. Michael gripped my shoulder. Mrs. Chen? Marina appeared at the door. The research? Team leaders are assembled in conference room A, and there's something else you should see. She led us to the employee break room where the massive TV displayed financial news. MediCore's stock, which had plunged yesterday, was rebounding sharply. Markets responding to the restructuring announcement, Lisa observed. Your father's Protocol Phoenix. It's not just saving the company, it's strengthening it. Sofia. Sarah burst in, her tablet displaying a complex data set. The original trial data, before they modified it, I found something. The base formula, it actually shows promise. If we reconfigure the binding mechanism, return to the original molecular structure. We could make it work, Michael finished, studying the data. Safely, effectively. That's what Dad saw, I realized. That's why they couldn't let him finish the inspection. The real breakthrough was there all along. They just wanted the quick profit instead of doing the work. My phone buzzed. A message. From Agent Reynolds. Victoria and James had been arrested trying to flee to Malaysia. Uncle Philip was cooperating with authorities, trading information for leniency. Mrs. Chen? A young researcher appeared, clutching a folder. We found these in the secured archives. Original notes from your father's last days at the lab. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. There, in my father's precise handwriting, were detailed observations about the treatment's potential, about the proper way to develop it, about his dreams for MediCore's future. Call the research team leaders, I decided. It's time to rebuild. The next hour was a blur of meetings. Department heads pledged their support for the restructuring. Research teams presented plans for ethically rebuilding the trial program. Employee representatives expressed relief at the company's renewed commitment to its original mission. There's one more thing, Lisa pulled me aside after the last meeting. The board members who resigned, they're required to surrender their shares under the company bylaws, which means, combined with your inheritance and the Protocol Phoenix provisions, you now have controlling interest in MediCore. She smiled. just like your father always intended. I walked to the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. Somewhere in a holding cell, Marcus was confessing to his crimes. In Hong Kong, Way International was imploding. And here, in the building my father had built with dreams of helping people, hope was rising from the ashes. Mrs. Chen? Marina appeared with a stack of documents. The new Research Oversight Committee needs your signature, and these arrived from your father's house. She handed me a small box. Inside was my father's jade Buddha and a sealed envelope. My hands shook as I opened it. My dearest Sophia, the letter began. If you're reading this, then Protocol Phoenix has been activated. Trust your instincts. Remember why we built MediCore. And most importantly, remember that the greatest legacy we can leave is not in profits or patents, but in lives saved and hope restored. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. I sat at my father's restored desk, his favorite ginger tea warming my hands as I watched the headlines scroll across the massive wall screen. Breaking news: MediCore announces revolutionary cancer treatment protocol reform. 1 month had passed since that fateful Christmas dinner, and the pharmaceutical research landscape was transforming in ways even I hadn't anticipated. The soft hum of the office was interrupted by Sarah's purposeful stride as she entered, clutching a thick folder, bound in blue. Her eyes sparkled with an excitement I hadn't seen since before my father's death. The International Review Board didn't just approve our new testing framework, she announced, spreading documents across my desk. They're calling it the Chen Protocol. It's becoming the new mandatory standard for all drug trials in Asia. 3 major pharmaceutical companies have already pledged to adopt it globally. Michael appeared in the doorway, his laptop balanced precariously on a stack of research papers. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of countless late nights, but his face glowed with satisfaction. The most remarkable thing, he said, settling into one of the leather chairs, is that implementing Dad's original research methodology is actually accelerating development timelines. When you remove the shortcuts and corrupted data, when you document everything properly and maintain transparent trials, it's like watching a fog lift from the entire process. I nodded, running my fingers along the rim of my teacup. Everything he fought for, everything he tried to protect, it wasn't just about ethics. He knew this was the most efficient path forward all along. The weight of his wisdom, his foresight, settled around me like a familiar embrace. Lisa burst in, her characteristic energy filling the room. Her red glasses were perched on top of her head, and she carried a stack of documents that seemed to defy gravity. The final settlement papers from Way International just came through, she announced, dropping them on my desk with a satisfying thud. Their entire cancer research division is being transferred to our new independent foundation. Full control, complete access to all their legitimate research data. She paused, pulling out another document from the middle of the stack. And Marcus signed the divorce papers, uncontested. The last detail washed over me with surprising hollowness. The man I'd married, the life we'd shared. It all seemed to belong to another person, another timeline. I turned to the window, watching researchers file into the adjacent building, their lab coats bright against the morning sun. There's something else. Lisa's voice softened, pulling me back to the present. She moved to my laptop, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. The investigators found this in Alan Zhao's private server. It's footage from the night of the accident, the real footage. The room's atmosphere shifted instantly. Michael rose from his chair, moving to stand beside me as Lisa connected her laptop to the wall screen. The security footage was grainy, distorted by rain, but clear enough. My father's car approached the facility gates, his headlights cutting through the darkness. Then, emerging from the shadows, another vehicle appeared, one that had never been mentioned in any official report. "We traced the license plate," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was registered to a shell company controlled by Way International, the same one that processed Alan's payments after everything." Michael's hand found mine, squeezing gently. The truth we'd suspected, laid bare in black and white. "They didn't just cover up an accident," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They orchestrated it, all because he was getting too close to the truth." The heavy moment was interrupted by Marina's gentle knock. "Mrs. Chen? The research team leaders are assembled in conference room A for the briefing." She hesitated, then added, "And there's someone else here to see you." Diana Way stood behind her, a shadow of her former self. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple business attire. Her signature jade bracelet was conspicuously absent, leaving her wrist bare, vulnerable. She took a hesitant step into the office, her eyes darting between the faces watching her. "I'll handle the briefing," Sarah said quietly, gathering her materials. She paused to squeeze my shoulder as she passed. Michael followed after a moment's hesitation, his protective instincts warring with his respect for my authority. Lisa lingered until I gave her a slight nod, then closed the door behind her. Diana took another step forward, clutching a worn leather journal to her chest like a shield. "I know I have no right to be here," she began, her voice lacking its usual aristocratic Polish. "After everything that happened, everything we did." The morning light caught the tears in her eyes, making them glitter like the diamonds she used to wear so proudly. Slowly, reverently, she placed the journal on my desk. "This belonged to your father, Marcus. Marcus took it the night of the accident. I found it when I was clearing out our house." My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the journal. The leather was soft, worn from years of use. Inside, pages of my father's precise handwriting filled every space: observations, molecular diagrams, trial protocols. But between the scientific notations were personal thoughts, dreams for the company's future, hopes for the treatments he was developing. "He was right," Diana's voice cracked, drawing my attention back to her. "About everything. The treatment protocols, the trial methodology, the company's fundamental mission. We became so obsessed with quarterly profits and market competition that we forgot what MediCore was actually built for: helping people." I studied the woman before me, trying to reconcile her with the polished, imperious figure who had sat at my dinner table just a month ago. The perfectly maintained facade had crumbled, revealing something I hadn't expected: genuine remorse. "Why bring this now?" I asked, my fingers still resting on my father's journal. Diana sank into a chair, her shoulders slumping. "Because 20 years ago, before I was Mrs. Way, before all of this, I was just another cancer patient in one of MediCore's first trial programs. Your father's early research saved my life." She looked up, tears flowing freely now. "I lived because of his work, his dedication to doing things the right way. And how did I repay that debt? By helping destroy everything he built." Through the window, I could see the researchers in the adjacent building, bent over microscopes and computer screens, working to rebuild what had been corrupted. Their dedication, their commitment to the truth, it was everything my father had envisioned for MediCore. "The Chen Protocol," I said slowly, measuring each word, "requires independent patient advocates on all review boards. People who've been through trials themselves, who understand personally what's at stake, who know why the integrity of the research matters." Diana's eyes widened as she understood what I was suggesting. "You would trust me to—" "Not me," I cut in firmly. "The ethics committee will make that decision. But if you truly want to make amends, that's where you start. Not with me, not with apologies, but with the work itself." After she left, I opened my father's journal again, letting myself sink into his thoughts, his process, his hopes for MediCore's future. On the last page, written in his steady hand, was a message that brought fresh tears to my eyes. Sofia, remember, true healing takes time, but it's worth the wait. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Agent Reynolds called with updates on Marcus's sentencing hearing, scheduled for next week. Sarah sent preliminary protocols for the first round of revised trials, set to begin next month. Michael forwarded photos of the research team, proudly wearing new lab coats emblazoned with the Phoenix Protocol emblem. I placed my father's jade Buddha on its new perch by my desk, then turned my attention to the proposals for MediCore's restructured research division. There was work to be done, lives to save, wrongs to right, and this time, we would do it the right way. His way. 6 months had passed since that fateful Christmas dinner. Spring had bloomed and faded, giving way to Singapore's sweltering summer. I stood on the stage of MediCore's main auditorium, facing a sea of faces, researchers, investors, media, and most importantly, patients from our revised trial program. Today marks not just a milestone for MediCore, I began, my voice carrying through the packed hall, but a fundamental shift in how we approach pharmaceutical research in Asia. Behind me, screens displayed real-time data from our transparent trial protocols, a living testament to the Chen protocol's impact. In the front row, Michael sat beside Sarah, both beaming with pride. Next to them, a group of patients from our reformed trial program, living proof that doing things the right way wasn't just ethically sound, it was effective. The preliminary results from our restructured cancer treatment trials have exceeded all expectations, I continued, gesturing to the molecular models rotating on the screens. By returning to the original formula, by taking the time to do proper testing, we've achieved what rushed trials and corrupted data never could. Genuine breakthrough. A ripple of excitement passed through the audience as I pulled up the success rates. The numbers spoke for themselves. 82% positive response rate, minimal side effects, and most importantly, 0 fatalities. After the presentation, I made my way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding questions. A young researcher approached, clutching a well-worn copy of my father's published papers. "Ms. Chen," she said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm, "your father's original methodology. It's revolutionizing how we approach protein binding in immunotherapy." Before I could respond, Lisa appeared at my elbow. "The SEC's final report just came in," she whispered. "You'll want to see this." In my office, the team gathered around as Lisa pulled up the document. The investigation had uncovered the full extent of Way International's corruption. Dozens of compromised trials, millions in bribes, research data manipulated across multiple countries. "Marcus's sentencing is tomorrow," Lisa added softly. "They're expecting 15 to 20 years. Alan Zhao took a plea deal. He's testifying against Way International's entire board." Sarah studied the molecular diagrams on my wall screen. "You know what's remarkable? Once we stripped away all the corrupted research, the true breakthroughs were there all along. Your father's original work, it was brilliant in its simplicity." "Speaking of brilliant," Michael interjected, pulling up data on his tablet, "wait until you see what the new research team discovered. Remember those binding anomalies Dad noted in his journal? Well..." A knock at the door interrupted him. Marina entered with a familiar face. Diana Way, but not as we'd last seen her. Gone was the designer wardrobe and careful makeup. Instead, she wore a simple blazer with the Patient Advocacy Program's pin on her lapel. "The Ethics Committee approved my first independent trial review," she said, her voice steady but humble. "I'll be working with terminal patients, helping them understand the protocols, ensuring their voices are heard." I nodded, remembering my father's words about healing taking time. "How are the support groups going?" "Better than expected." "When?" "Patients know they're truly being heard when they trust the process." Diana's eyes grew distant. "It's what healthcare should have been all along. My phone buzzed. A message from Agent Reynolds. The last of Way International's hidden accounts had been traced. The funds were being redirected to a foundation for families affected by compromised trials. Mrs. Chen? Marina appeared again. The new research facility designs are ready for your approval. And there's something else. She handed me an envelope bearing the Nobel Committee's seal. The room fell silent as I opened it. They're nominating the Chen Protocol for next year's Medicine Prize, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Not just for the cancer treatment breakthrough, but for revolutionizing pharmaceutical research ethics across Asia. Michael wrapped me in a tight hug. Dad would be so proud. Later that evening, as the tropical sun set over Singapore's skyline, I stood in the new research wing. The walls bore quotes from my father's work, his principles now serving as guiding lights for a new generation of researchers. Through the lab windows, I could see teams of scientists working late, their dedication a testament to what honest research could achieve. My phone buzzed again. Photos from the patient support group. Diana now led. Faces full of hope, of trust restored. This, I realized, was my father's true legacy. Not just the treatments or protocols that bore his name, but the fundamental belief that doing things right matters. That healing, both of bodies and systems, takes time and integrity. 1 year after that life-changing Christmas dinner, I sat in my father's restored office, reviewing the latest batch of trial data. The Singapore skyline had changed in subtle ways, new buildings rising, others being renovated, much like MediCore itself. The European Medical Board just approved our licensing agreement, Lisa announced, striding in with a stack of documents. They're implementing the Chen Protocol across all EU member states. Starting next month, every pharmaceutical trial in Europe will follow our transparency standards. Sarah burst in next, her tablet displaying complex molecular diagrams. The breakthrough we've been waiting for, she exclaimed, her eyes bright with excitement. The tertiary binding sequence, we finally cracked it. The treatment doesn't just stop cancer growth, it actively prevents recurrence in 78% of cases. I studied the data, remembering my father's notes about this very possibility. How soon can we begin extended trials? That's the best part. Michael joined us, his lab coat still on. Under the new accelerated ethical protocols, we can start next week. 10 research centers across Asia, all running simultaneous trials with complete data transparency. The intercom buzzed. Marina's voice carried through. Mrs. Chen, the international press conference is starting in 20 minutes, and the Patient Advocacy Board is ready with their presentation. I gathered my materials, pausing to straighten. My father's jade Buddha on its new perch. The last year had transformed not just MediCore, but the entire pharmaceutical industry. The fall of Way International had exposed decades of corruption, leading to a global overhaul of drug testing regulations. In the elevator down to the conference center, Lisa updated me on the final legal proceedings. Marcus's appeal was denied. The SEC's using our case to reshape corporate accountability laws. 3 other major pharmaceutical companies have already replaced their boards and adopted full transparency protocols. The conference room was packed. Journalists, industry leaders, and most importantly, patients and their families. Diana stood at the back, now heading our patient advocacy program, her designer suits replaced by practical business wear and a compassionate smile. Before we begin, I addressed the crowd, I want to share something my father wrote 30 years ago when he founded MediCore. I opened his journal to a marked page. Medicine isn't about profits or patents. It's about people. Every number in our trials represents a life, a family, a future. We never forget that. The presentation that followed showcased not just our medical breakthroughs, but the human impact of ethical research. Former patients shared their stories. Research teams demonstrated our transparent testing protocols. International regulators presented data showing how the Chen Protocol had already saved thousands of lives. After the conference, I retreated, To the new research wing, a state-of-the-art facility built on the principles my father had died protecting. Through the glass walls, I watched teams of scientists at work, their passion for discovery untainted by corporate greed. Mrs. Chen? A young researcher approached, holding up a tablet. We just received confirmation from the Tokyo trials. The enhanced treatment protocol. It's showing a 91% success rate in previously resistant cases. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an urgent message. The World Health Organization was calling an emergency session. They wanted to make the Chen protocol the global standard for all pharmaceutical research. Sarah appeared at my side, her face glowing. It's not just about cancer anymore, she said softly. The transparent trial system, the ethical protocols, they're revolutionizing research across all diseases. Your father's vision is becoming reality, I finished, watching a group of patient advocates leading a tour through the facility. Among them was Diana, explaining our safety protocols to a family whose child had just entered our treatment program. Michael joined us, carrying fresh lab results. Remember when Dad used to say that real progress takes time? He spread the papers across a nearby desk. Look at these results. By doing things the right way, by taking the time to get it right. We're actually moving faster, I nodded. Because we're not wasting time hiding mistakes or covering up failures. Every setback teaches us something valuable. Marina appeared with more updates. 3 major universities had adopted our research methodology for their medical programs. A prestigious scientific journal was dedicating an entire issue to the transformation of pharmaceutical testing under the Chen protocol. I walked to the window, watching the sunset paint Singapore's skyline in shades of gold and purple. Somewhere in this building, teams of dedicated scientists were working to save lives. In hospitals across Asia, patients were receiving treatments developed with integrity and care. And in boardrooms worldwide, executives were learning that ethics and progress could go hand in hand. 18 months after the Christmas dinner that changed everything, I found myself back in the penthouse where it all began. The space had been transformed. Gone were the cold, modern furnishings Marcus had preferred. Instead, warm woods and vibrant artwork filled the rooms, including several pieces from local artists who'd survived cancer thanks to our new treatment protocols. The final audit reports are in, Lisa announced, spreading documents across my father's restored dining table, the same one where Marcus had demanded my shares that fateful night. Way International's collapse exposed corruption in 17 major pharmaceutical companies. 12 CEOs resigned, 8 boards completely restructured. Michael entered through the kitchen, carrying a tray of traditional Chinese tea. Remember when this table last saw corporate documents? He smiled, setting down the tea service. Now it's witnessing the biggest transformation in medical research history. The doorbell chimed. Sarah arrived with Dr. James Wong, the head of the World Health Organization's new Pharmaceutical Oversight Committee. You need to see this, she said, connecting her tablet to the wall screen. Global implementation of the Chen protocol has reduced adverse drug reactions by 64% in just 1 year. Dr. Wong nodded enthusiastically. More importantly, research efficiency has increased by 89%. When scientists don't have to waste time hiding data or manipulating results, real breakthroughs happen faster. Marina appeared with a familiar box, my father's old research archives. They finished digitizing the last of his notes, she said softly. The medical library is naming their new ethical research wing after him. As I opened the box, memories flooded back. My father's meticulous notes, his careful observations, his unwavering commitment to doing things right. Between technical diagrams and trial data were personal reflections that now seemed prophetic. The WHO's annual report just went live, Lisa called out, her red glasses reflecting her screen. They're citing MediCore's transformation as a case study in corporate rehabilitation. From corruption to conscience, the Chen Protocol Revolution. A notification pinged on my phone. photos from our latest patient graduation ceremony. Survivors of previously untreatable cancers, standing proud with their families. Among them was Diana, her patient advocacy work having evolved into a full-time mission. "Mrs. Chen?" a young voice called from the doorway. Amy Chen, no relation, a brilliant researcher we'd recruited from Singapore's top university. "The new immunotherapy trials are showing unprecedented results. The methodology you implemented, it's not just saving lives, it's changing how we understand cancer itself." Moved to the windows, looking out over the city my father had loved. The same views that had witnessed my humiliation now watched over MediCore's renaissance. Below, construction crews worked on our new research campus, a sprawling complex dedicated to transparent, ethical pharmaceutical development. "Your father would be proud," Dr. Wong said quietly, joining me at the window. "Not just of the medical breakthroughs, but of how you've changed the entire industry's culture." Sarah approached with another set of results. "The independent review board just approved our expanded trials, 20 countries, 50 research centers, all following the Chen protocol. Complete transparency, real-time data sharing, patient advocacy, at every level." "And look at this," Michael added, pulling up financial projections. "Turns out, ethical research is actually more profitable in the long run, when you factor in reduced liability, increased efficiency, and public trust." The penthouse filled with afternoon light, casting long shadows across the floor. On the wall, a new installation caught the sun, a matrix of photos showing patients before and after our treatments. Real people, real lives, real hope. Marina entered with more news. "The University Consortium is ready to launch the Charles Chen Fellowship for Ethical Research, full funding for scientists committed to transparent protocols. And..." She paused, smiling. "The first recipient is that young researcher who exposed similar corruption at another company." I touched my father's jade Buddha, now sitting proudly on the mantel. He always said that one person's courage could change everything, that standing up for what's right ripples outward. "Like those ripples from the first Chen protocol implementation," Lisa interjected. "Now look, global standard for FAR2. Years to the day after that Christmas dinner, I stood in MediCore's newly inaugurated Charles Chen Memorial Research Center. The massive facility gleamed in the morning sun, its architecture reflecting our commitment to transparency, walls of glass, open laboratories, collaborative spaces where scientists and patient advocates worked side by side. "The Nobel Committee's announcement goes live in 10 minutes, Lisa said, adjusting her trademark red glasses. The anticipation in the room was palpable. Researchers, administrators, and patients gathered around the screens, waiting to hear if the Chen protocol's impact on global medicine would receive the recognition many felt it deserved. But my attention was drawn to a different screen, where real-time data flowed from our latest trials. Survival rates had exceeded our most optimistic projections. Patients once considered terminal were returning to their lives, their families, their futures. This, I knew, was the real victory. "Mrs. Chen?" Marina appeared with an envelope bearing the Singapore government's seal. The Medical Innovation Act passed unanimously. Every research facility in the country must now implement full transparency protocols. They're calling it the Chen Standard. Sarah burst through the doors, her tablet displaying complex molecular diagrams. "The breakthrough we theorized? It's confirmed. The treatment doesn't just target existing cancer cells, it reprograms the body's immune response. We're seeing prevention rates that were considered impossible 2 years ago." Michael joined us, his eyes bright with excitement. "Remember Dad's notes about cellular regeneration? The ones Marcus tried to bury? We finally understood what he was seeing. It's not just about fighting disease, it's about teaching the body to heal itself." Through the facility's glass walls, I watched teams of scientists collaborating with patient advocates. In one lab, Diana led a group of trial participants through the latest protocol updates, her former socialite polish transformed into genuine compassion. Down the hall, young researchers worked alongside veteran scientists, their shared commitment to ethical research bridging generations. The global implementation report just came in, Lisa announced, pulling up statistics. 78 countries have adopted the Chen protocol. Research efficiency up 94%, adverse events down 82%, and most importantly, public trust in pharmaceutical research has reached unprecedented levels. A young researcher approached, carrying results from our international partnership program. Universities across Asia are restructuring their medical research departments. They're not just teaching the protocols, they're embedding ethical research principles into their core curriculum. The screen suddenly lit up with breaking news. The Nobel Committee's announcement began, but before they reached their decision, my phone buzzed with a message that meant more. Photos from our latest patient recovery ward, children returning to school, parents reuniting with families, grandparents meeting newborn grandchildren they'd thought they'd never see. Mrs. Chen? Dr. Wang appeared, his WHO credentials catching the light. The United Nations just unanimously passed the Global Pharmaceutical Transparency Act. Every drug trial, every research facility, every pharmaceutical company worldwide must now adhere to Chen protocol standards. I moved to my father's old desk, now centerpiece of the facility's heritage display. His journals lay open, his vision for ethical medicine preserved for future generations. Next to them stood the jade, Buddha, watching over this new era of medical research. 2 years, Michael mused, joining me. Remember what Dad always said about real change? That it happens twice, I finished. First in the mind, then in reality. The facility hummed with purpose. Researchers discussing results, patient advocates, sharing insights, international observers learning our protocols. In the courtyard below, a group of recovered patients gathered for their monthly support meeting, their voices carrying faintly through the glass. Marina approached with one final update. The last of Way International's hidden research has been recovered and corrected. Their former facilities are being converted into transparent research centers. And she smiled. Marcus's appeal was denied. The court cited the Chen protocol's impact as justification for maintaining his full sentence. The Nobel announcement concluded, but I barely registered it. A young girl had entered the facility with her parents, her bright eyes and bouncing, steps showing no sign of the terminal diagnosis she'd faced a year ago. She waved at me through the glass, her smile worth more than any award. Your father was right, Sarah said softly, watching the child. The most important breakthroughs aren't measured in profits or prizes. They're measured in moments like these. I finished, touching the jade Buddha one last time. In lives saved, in hope restored, in truth prevailing. Outside, Singapore's skyline stretched toward the future, its towers reaching for the same heights as our aspirations for ethical medicine. The sun caught the facility's glass walls, sending ribbons of light dancing across the laboratories where science and conscience now worked as one. The story that began with betrayal on a Christmas night had transformed into something far greater, a revolution in how humanity approached the very essence of healing. And somewhere, I knew, my father was smiling. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.